Hello and welcome to Rebuild. My name is Michael Belch, and as always, I'm joined by my brother Bradley Belch. And Bradley has recently completed a move and actually is kind of in the middle of it, but at least is there and waiting for his family to arrive. We're glad to have him back on the show today, and we're hoping that going forward, we'll be back to a more regular schedule and putting out content with kind of the regularly scheduled timeline. Today, our episode is going to be our follow-up episode to our interview that we had with Stephen Wolfe, and that episode was a few weeks ago now. So if you did listen to it and want to refresh, you could go back and listen to it again. If you didn't, it's well worth listening to. We really enjoyed the conversation that we had with Stephen, and today we're going to be kind of picking up some of the ideas that came through in our discussion with him. As always, our goal here on Rebuild is to explore and discover what God has to say about how all parts of life should be run. Society, culture, arts, government, our own holiness, our marriages, our families, all of it. And the conversation with Stephen focused largely on political involvement. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about that. What does it mean for Christians to be involved politically? Should that be left to statesmen? Should the regular or the ground level Christian be thinking along political terms and political lines? How should all of these things kind of work themselves out into society? Before we jump into that discussion, I do want to make it a point to say, if you are enjoying our podcast or our YouTube videos, we really would appreciate it if you would tell someone else about it or share the episode that really helped you out with a friend or a family member that you think it would benefit as well. We are trying to grow the platform a little bit, not just for more views or listens, but because we want to be as encouraging as we can and as helpful to people within the church as we can. And so if that's you and if something that encourages you, feel free to pass it on or leave us a rating or even a comment if you're watching on YouTube. Go ahead.
I'll jump in there. Even more than just telling somebody about it, just have a conversation about whatever like, you don't even have to be like, hey, there was this podcast, like, just have a conversation about the ideas and say, I was listening to so-and-so and this is the idea and what do you think about that? More than just like, hey, go listen to that podcast. But talk about the ideas. We're trying to get to a place where the things that we talk about in culture are similar discussions to what you and I have on this podcast. Not to diminish the value of relaxation and entertainment, but we do want to be intentional with what we're talking about. So, yes, tell other people if you care, but more importantly, just have conversations. If it strikes you and you find it interesting and compelling, go and have that same conversation with somebody else. And of course, feel free to use our name.
Good. Well, and honestly, I mean, we're reading and listening to a lot of stuff on our own. So we're already taking the ideas that we are hearing on podcasts like King's Hall Podcast or Hardman or Steve Dace or the Ezra Institute or Right Response Ministries, even a lot of the Daily Wire stuff.
Canon Press.
Canon Press, yep. So we're taking those ideas and we are having those conversations with people around us and with each other. And yeah, Bradley, your point is well taken. We're not looking for a podcast culture, right? We're looking for a group of Christians who believe that the message of the Bible is applicable to all people, starting with the law of God, how he expects us to live, and the provision of the gospel, and then that playing itself out now in how we as Christians ought to live in society and how we should call society to behave. So we're hoping to encourage you in your conversation and action as you listen and view our shows. So if that's going on, then we consider that success. Okay, let's go ahead and dive in. And I want to just kind of highlight maybe a couple of ideas that came through in our interview with Stephen. And one of them, I'm going to mention all three, and then we'll kind of come back. One of them is that Christians ought to wield political power. In other words, it's not only possible and permissible, it's not only good, but it's actually proper, right? Proper that some Christians would wield political power towards godly ends within their society. Okay, that was one thing that really struck both of us. Another thing that we talked about with Stephen is this idea of catchphrases, and kind of he called it his toolkit or the tool bag, the phrases and sayings that I think have been used throughout history to sometimes we call them common sense sayings, like, a penny saved is a penny earned. We used to have a lot of these in our culture, and they're still around, right? So what do our toolkit sayings say about us, and how can we use those effectively? And then also the idea of honoring our history, cherishing our history, respecting our elders by dealing well with history and the forebears that came before us was something that stuck out to us as well. So we're going to start there, and we'll jump into a range of issues. And before we look at those three things, Bradley, you and I both were balancing between a little bit of discouragement on one hand, and on the other hand, kind of a fire being lit, right? Discouragement of, man, like the battle seems all uphill right now, and it seems like a lot of the people around us are more interested in getting some sleep back in the camp on their bunks, versus, wow, we're in a battle. Like we need to, in the Bible they say, gird up your loins, right? We need to take action. We need to prepare, and we're excited to engage that. So do you want to talk a little bit about just kind of this tension that both you and I are feeling as we look at culture and our own personal response and the response of Christians broadly?
I mean, the frustration of trying to get people motivated to do something is real, no matter what the thing you're trying to get people to do is. If you want to do something and others don't, that's a really frustrating place to be. But for us specifically, what we're struggling with on this note is, it's not just that we want to go play board games and other people don't want to go play board games right now. They're not in the mood for a board game. It's that we are called to do these things as believers. So we're not trying to rally for some trivial thing. We're trying to rally to hold people to account for the things that God has told us to do in His Word. And the frustration is, we have such a culture within the church community in America that has pushed against that or neglected that for so long, that now to go back to a more aggressive, fervent defense of not just the gospel. We all know we need to defend the gospel, but all that God has, people don't like the uncomfortableness of that battle, of that hard work that's required, and it's just very frustrating to try and move past that. And then the next frustration for me is, well, where do we even start? How do we even start? We have this huge bureaucracy against us. We have a culture that is just completely rampant in ways against God's word, whether it's sexual sins or just simply like laziness and comfort. I mean, all of these things are mounted against us, and Christians are in that same realm of struggle, right? Like we're all there. So trying to wake people up is not as easy as we would like, but that's kind of the frustration from my end. Now you mentioned hope, and there is, we're inspired to do it. We're excited to try and do it, but man, it can get really discouraging sometimes sitting here going, how do we build this network of people around us that are mission minded, that are on pursuit of these things that we're talking about?
Yeah. And I suppose there's even a lesson there to some degree. Like where I am, I'm part of a church that has this as its goal, and it's not a very large church, and it's a newer church in the last year and a half. But here I've got kind of that camaraderie and targeted purpose and shared vision. And where you are, you're really kind of feeling the need where you moved that you might have to put the work in to try and build something like that. And I guess what I would like to say to listeners is, um, be on the lookout for community. If you're in a community already that wants to engage in some of these ways, there might be people that are looking for that you can welcome in. But you've got to be kind of a little bit about outspoken about it. And if you feel alone in that, I don't have any great options for you. You've probably already been looking at the churches in your area. But we'd love to connect with you digitally, or find people who follow other podcasts, join the Twitter following of the Hardman podcast, things like that, and get some ideas on how you can build a movement there. But Bradley, I have a feeling that over the next couple months, you're going to have some thoughts and comments about these things, because you're actively looking to try and build kind of a grassroots community in your area.
Or like you say, find one.
Yeah, or find one. That would be great too. Yeah.
Find and become a part of.
Yeah.
Because that kind of ties into that first point of catchphrases that Stephen Wolfe talked about that we kind of want to spin off on.
Yeah.
The communities we're looking for are not communities that the catchphrases are fine, and they actually might even be good. I think we had a discussion with Stephen Wolfe. They're certainly not going to be. That reality is just a simple reality of the way the world works, of the power struggles. If you want to go there, the people that have power intellectually or physically or whatever, they're going to have things that steer conversations, and that's just the way we're going to follow. But we're not looking to build communities that use those catchphrases without thought or motivation behind it. So we're not trying to own the libs, right? We're not just trying to own the libs. We're not just trying to mock the libs. We're not trying to, just destroy the left. We are, but we're trying to do it with thought, and we're trying to destroy the thoughts and replace them with our own thoughts. And I think it's really easy to stop at the, well, that's a really dumb idea. Ha ha ha, isn't that really stupid? And not go, the next level from there is, that's a dumb idea. Here's why, and here's a better one. From the way we see it, which is God's word. So catchphrases, using them to then take the next step, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. The next step of what are we going to replace whatever we're making fun of, whatever the catchphrase is pointing to, how are we going to use that to replace an idea?
Mm-hmm. It was so interesting, and I'm going to mention this a couple of times in our discussion today, but last Sunday, some of the people from our church and a few other churches in the area went out and participated in a counter protest, I guess. There was a protest that was downtown in front of the city hall, and they were protesting the whole Roe versus Wade being overturned. And so we thought, well, we don't want their voice to be the only one. We want some people down there saying, no, we're really happy that Roe versus Wade was overturned. And so we were down there, and it got a little loud and a little heated, not in a physical way, but just there were some angry chants going on, and all of us got cussed out and sworn out and flipped off and bumped and blocked and pushed around a little bit. But it was so interesting because for about 20 or 30 minutes, a substantial portion of that other side just was screaming. I mean, they must have been completely without a voice the next morning. My body, my choice, my body, my choice. Like 30 minutes, right? 30 minutes, just over and over and over and over. And catchphrases have a certain power. Like every political party, every company has a slogan. Not every, but companies often focus on this. And I even think like in a way, some of the catechisms that we offer our children sometimes, or like we are trying to impart truth in manageable bites, I guess is what it is, right? And this has always been the case, and every marketing company knows the power of having a catchphrase stuck in your head. And Bradley, I'm curious if what you think needs to happen is, do Christians need to come up with better catchphrases? Like we have been completely out. Catchphrase is not a verb, but we've been worse at coming up with catchphrases than the left. Part of it, by the way, is if you go back and you read in the 30s and 40s, there were people who were coming out of Russia and trying to spread communism in America. And they are on video and on record, even once video was around, but record before that, saying what we need to do is we need to invent phrases that sound positive, but that actually carry a subversive meaning. And so from early on, communism and Marxists have been trying to come up with phrases that sound appealing to the masses, but actually undermine it. So if you take pro-choice, you take marriage equality, my body, my choice, all of those things, those are ways that they have tried to subvert the American system. And I would say, it's been extended to subvert Christianity. Bradley, do you think that that's sneaky and Christians should avoid that? We should just have really solid arguments? Or do you think that we need to be better at coming up with catchphrases that really trigger and spark the belief in the imagination?
I do not think we need subversive tactics.
Well, they can be building up catchphrases.
Yeah, but the truths that we're trying to spread are inherently offensive to those who don't believe them. So no amount of sugarcoating it with a building up language is going to convince anyone of anything. I think we just need to be more convicted on the power that we have behind us in the truths that we're saying. So we can say things like, we are pro-life, or we are pro-family, whatever the terminology is. But we are also adamantly anti the inverse of it. So, or even minor inverses of it that aren't directly like the polar opposite. So like, that's why we're against homosexuality, one, because God says so, but also because it does not support or promote healthy family life. And people get mad when you tell them that's the reality. There's a huge thing right now with Dave Rubin and his surrogacy kids that he's going to have with his husband.
So-called husband.
And what's that?
So-called husband.
So-called husband. So we don't believe that's a healthy family setting. We don't even necessarily acknowledge it as true marriage by God's definition of marriage. So in saying we're pro-family, we have to take that to the absolute, and we're not gonna win friends right away necessarily. Now, we are not against those people. We're not against Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin is doing more. Steve Dace makes this point. Yeah. Dave Rubin is doing more for the quote-unquote Christian cause. Dave Rubin's not a Christian, but his ideas are, more similarly aligned with some of the conservative points. Not all of them, obviously. He's gay, but he's doing the work where the church is not. Yeah. Where the Christian believers are not. I would much prefer every member of a church to be going out there and doing the work that Dave Rubin is doing, but we are not. And in the stead of that, we have to work with what we have. And we kind of talked about this a little bit in a couple episodes ago. The co-belligerence and how long do we put up with co-belligerency,
Right.
and while I would much prefer Dave Rubin, us to be doing the job that Dave Rubin is doing, we're not doing it. So I'm gonna work with what I have.
Yeah.
That's a long-winded answer of saying, no, I don't think we need better catchphrases. I think we just need to hold to the truths of the catch. We need to know what we're saying when we say those catchphrases. So if and memes are kind of the modern way of it, right? Like memes are great. They're right. Conservatives generally are really good at doing memes because bad ideas are really easy to make fun of in a quick little statement. But we can't leave it at the meme. We have to be able to explain beyond the meme. The meme is just a mode of communication, but we have to have the ideas behind the meme locked down and secured, and an understanding there, so that when we go have the discussions, it's not just like, hey, I saw this cool meme or this funny meme, and that's it. Like we need to be able to back it up.
Yeah. Okay, so but this raises this question. I think Stephen Wolfe was right that a lot of Christians are basically operating on slogans that they're getting from people who are either using the church for political power or are more progressive or just who haven't thought through. I think there are three options: the tricked, the liberals, and then the sneaky. And a lot of Christians are saying things like, well, I just need to love my neighbor, right? Like that has become one of the phrases that is winning the day in the church. So I don't know. We didn't really talk about this, but what do we do about, and that one's particularly insidious because it's a true statement that's being misapplied, right? What do you think? Any thoughts on what we can do about some of the falsely used or just flat out false sayings and catchphrases that are prevalent in Christianity in America now?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a lot to say on that. I mean, reclaim the definition of love. I've been pounding that drum for 3 years now, 2 years. So, trying to, because again, we've talked about this before, but it was love thy neighbor and wear your mask. And I didn't hold to that from the very beginning, which made me go, okay, where else is this use of love being misinterpreted? And it was, there was many things that we used it for before the pandemic, but the pandemic just kind of opened my eyes to going, yeah, no, we got this all backwards. So I don't know, reclaiming some of those terms or catchphrases for sure. But I think the further into a subjective postmodern world that we get, or postmodern, I don't know where we're at in that whole progression, where words don't have meaning, we do need to define words. It can be obnoxious, like starting every conversation with, what do you mean by that? What are we talking about specifically? Is this in the definition or is this not in the definition? But starting there, not moving past love thy neighbor before we define love.
And neighbor.
And neighbor.
And maybe even thy.
Yep. And it's really, it's kind of annoyingly granular, but we need to be, now is not a time to be unclear or unspecific, because if we're not in agreement on love thy neighbor or the definitions of those words, then whatever context we use that in is going to be whistling past the graveyard because we haven't established, this principle, these words. So.
Well, this is so interesting to me. We've also mentioned this a few times on our podcast. Hopefully today doesn't just become our greatest hits, which we don't have any hits yet. So, but I remember taking and listening to various apologetics teachings and trainings, right? Where it was how to talk to Mormons or how to talk to atheists or, whatever. And we used to train ourselves to define terms, especially when talking with Mormons, because they will use the exact same words. And if you're not careful, you're either talking past each other or you're buying into what they're saying because they have different definitions of things. It's interesting to me that I don't hear as much of an emphasis on defining terms like what you're saying, Bradley. We tend to, I don't know why. Maybe there's just so many terms. Maybe it's overwhelming to define every term. But we tend to kind of allow the definitions of that the world proposes to stand. And Doug Wilson has been saying it for a long time. The battle for the church and the battle for Western civilization is the battle over the dictionary. And that's not a very that's not a very inspiring rally call, right? Like to me it is. I'm kind of an English nerd. I'm thinking, yes, bring on the dictionary. But to most people, they're like, that like give me a hill to climb or something. The dictionary. Who cares about that? But I've noticed. Here's one that I'm putting my foot down on. We have got to. I know technically, grammatically, the rules have changed, but we have got to stop using they when we mean he or she. Okay, we have to. Sometimes you're talking about an unknown person and you might say they. I'm even trying to avoid that. But I've even heard people saying, oh yeah, my brother over there, they like cheese, right? When we already know we're talking about a man, like we've got to stop doing it. That's a definition that matters, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, we should start a competitor to Webster's dictionary.
Yeah, what's the urban dictionary? We
urban
could get
dictionary, but
yeah,
we want the Christian in the sense that these are just the truths.
Right.
The battle for language is tough because words do change, meaning does change, and yet, so we're not entirely advocating for just a static definition forever. But there are some things that are unchangeable.
Right.
The definition of they and the way it's used. The definition of love, the way it's used. Male, female. I mean, these are things that are not free to just be used however we change it in culture. So let's go back to I want to go back to what you said about the defining terms with Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and such, because one of the points that we had talked about when we were discussing, implications of what Stephen Wolfe said, was this idea that we had heard on a Right Response Ministries interview with Steve Dace about what we're facing now is no longer just.
I'm going to link that, by the way, because it's well worth listening to. So check below or check the description.
What we're dealing with now is no longer just politics in the political realm. And some of the tensions of the church is they don't want to, and this is what Stephen Wolfe was talking about, they don't want to wield political power because they don't feel like it's the realm of the church. But we're not at a place anymore where we're just discussing politics. We are combating a threatening and enemy religion. Now, they will never call it a religion, but their tenets, their principles, their methods, their level of engagement, their passion around it, it is a religion. And Steve Dace talks a little bit about how we got here, but my point that I want to talk about here today is the fact that we are not just playing a political game. So when we get people like Donald Trump or Marjorie Taylor Greene or any of those little bit more abrasive, seemingly rough around the edges politicians, those people at least understand what time it is and the level of intensity and non-compromise that you have to have when dealing with a religion like this. Now, Christians should treat it the same way. They should be completely comfortable going to intellectual battle, abrasive, aggressive, hard-fought battle over these principles. We're not fighting politics. This isn't a left and right anymore.
Right.
This is Christian pagan. This is Christian principles versus demonic principles. And politics, left and right, doesn't really matter anymore. They're both demonic. They're both participating in a system that is purely demonic. So if we're going to send politicians to our cities, our counties, our states, our country, those politicians have to understand that this isn't just like back and forth, left and right. This is a spiritual battle that we are fighting over, and it's going to be messy. You're going to have to be abrasive and confrontational and unwilling to compromise. It's just that's just the way it is. And we as Christians need to support those people. We need to wield that political power, and that's what Stephen Wolfe. That's his whole focus right now in his writing and his studies and his it is Christian politics. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I have a couple things, and I'll start here. The other thing, I think it's an implication of what he was saying, because we're kind of coming to it from the back door, but his comment was also born out of the fact that not every in the same way that not every Christian is going to perfectly understand how a car runs, right? Not every Christian is perfectly going to understand the best, how to make a perfect loaf of sourdough bread. Okay. Not every Christian is going to have a perfect, deep, comprehensive view of political theology. I think there are things that we can do. Like, for instance, Canon Press and Doug Wilson has just recently released a catechism on liberty and freedom and government. And then his colleague, Toby Sumter, released one a couple months ago simply on government. Like, we should be teaching ourselves and our children what proper government is and what proper responsibility and freedom within a governmental structure looks like. That being the case, I think that Stephen Wolfe has a point in that even when Christians understand that, they're not going to know kind of the art of governing necessarily or of politics. And so we do need Christians. I'm listening to this series on American history right now, and it was amazing the people that God brought over with the Puritans and Pilgrims to be the early governors of those colonies, men like John Winthrop. John Winthrop studied law and politics and theology, right? Like, we need people who know something about it. I'm really excited for the resurgence of conservatives like Myra Flores and Marjorie Taylor Greene. But I want to be careful, because one of the things that we say about the left is we say things like, well, AOC was just a bartender. She doesn't know what she's doing, right? And, we need to be careful that we don't fall into that as well. Like, Christians need to wield political power out of a knowledge both of law and politics and God's law and the way he set up the world. And so, look, some of us need to specialize in this, right? Need to actively pursue this sort of arena in a degree, in the same way that someone would specialize in theological studies to become a pastor. So that's one thing. I have one other thing to say, but any quick comments on that?
Your point's well taken about the AOC, just a bartender. We don't want to be sending, flippant, uneducated people. At the same time, someone's got to go. We're at a place where someone has to go.
Agreed.
And we don't have a bench when it comes to that.
Yep.
So there's going to have to be people put on the front lines.
Yep.
And to me, Trump was this, and these early Marjorie Taylor Greenes. These are just the people that are willing to do it. While we get a deeper bench that we can start sending up. But we do need to. You're absolutely right. We do need to not only get people willing and deciding to go do it. Yeah, I would say that the government that we're sending people to right now are para-mission adjacent. They're like going back to what we were saying before. They are. It is a religion that we are fighting against that we need to vanquish right now. So people that we're preparing, people that we're sending to go do this work, the church should be comfortable feeling like that's a ministry opportunity, not just in the sense that every job, every vocation is a ministry opportunity, but in the sense that we are sending ambassadors to proclaim Christ in a just like we would in a Hindu world or a Muslim world, specifically to counteract the ideas of Hinduism, Muslimism,
Islam.
Muslim,
Islam.
Islam. Only the difference here is it's just progressivism, spirit of the age progressivism. So that's what I would say on that. I think you had another point though.
Yeah, and it dovetails nicely off of that. The idea that progressivism, and actually what really turned me on to all of this was when I read Neil Shenvi talk about how critical race theory is not an academic theory. It fulfills all the requirements of its own worldview, right? Or critical theory broadly. And when I realized
Neil Shenvi is really great, by the way.
He is really great. However, he's a little bit on the, yes, terrible things are happening to the minorities right now, but the critical race theory is not the way to deal with it. But his analysis of critical theory and critical race theory, and I'll link one of his articles below also, is very, very good. But so, that was the critical race theory is a worldview. Progressivism is a worldview. And when we say worldview, what we really mean, what you just said, is a false religion. Okay. So Bradley, I want you to imagine that you are, you've never heard of America, right? And you come here for the first time and you realize this is a culture where they, for whatever reason they want, kill their babies. This is a culture where even before that, they have a casual hookup culture where they have sex with as many people as they want and can when they're not abusing pornography. This is a culture where when children are growing up, the parents basically hide them away. They put them in daycares. They send them off to some school. And in those schools, they start teaching these children up is not down, down is not up, man is not woman, woman is not man. And they push children into overtly sexual interactions and encounters in school. And then they encourage and even give special treatment to children who decide I'm not the gender which my sex would say that I am a different gender. And then not only that, but they suggest to those children that they should begin to transition to be that gender. And then they pass laws in states where parents don't have to be notified if this is the law in Washington State. If a child wants to transition and have surgery and puberty blockers. And so they are castrating people in this culture, and they are maiming people in this culture, and they are putting off puberty in ways that cannot be reversed ever. And so in our culture, we have, you would look at this, and that's just one small little avenue of perversion in our culture. And you would look at that and you would think, man, this culture, like, what is leading to this abuse and horrendous treatment of each other? In the same way that missionaries arrived in remote places and were horrified at cannibalism or at other kinds of abuse that were going on. Like, the big thing that's clicked for me recently with this idea of political power is that Christians must wield political power, because what you said earlier, this is not a political issue anymore. These are horrible, vile perversions and abominations that we are embracing as a society. They're not on the fringes anymore. And when we as Christians think, yeah, but I got to love my neighbor, so I can't say anything about that. Or when we say, yeah, but we can't make laws that would put an end to abortion or to child castration. We have got to break out of this mindset, and
we can't legislate morality.
Correct. So the mindset that has changed for me, even just thinking about our interview with Stephen Wolfe, was this: I used to think of us as persecuted Christians in Rome, where we just have to hunker down and we've got to deal with, whatever is coming down from on high. That's not it. That is not our situation. We do not live in a society where we don't have political power or influence. We rather, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's maybe a better one. We need to think of ourselves as missionaries arriving on the shore or in the forest, like in Germany, St. Boniface, and we are seeing horrible pagan practices. And of course, we're preaching the gospel, but we're also saying, stop. This is a disgrace. This is an abomination. God will judge you for doing this. Instead, we're like, well, but if I don't call someone by his or her preferred pronoun, he's going to be mad at me. And no, stop that. We're in the middle of immorality and gross.
If I don't accept that their trees are gods, because that's what they believe, then in the case of St. Boniface, then they'll never believe my faith. Somebody I was listening to, I wish I could remember who said it. It might have been Steve Days, and it might have been the King's Hall, and it might have been Doug Wilson. I don't know. It's like Christians want to. I think it was Doug Wilson that I'm saying it. Christians want to evangelize by turning off our light, right? Like we don't want to be a light in the darkness. We want to become part of the darkness and then show them the light switch. Right? Like our belief is going to be. It is in the face of the spirit of the age.
And I think we need to get over the idea. It used to be the case that the Christians were the cool kids in the lunchroom.
Yeah.
And that is not the case anymore. And we just need to get over it. It's the most freeing thing in the world when you realize I don't have to put up this front that makes me kind of cool and palatable and approachable to the world in the wrong way. Of course, we're approachable to them in that we want to love them. But again, we need to be careful of the definition of love.
Yeah.
We just need to we're not like, I don't know, we're not Campus Crusade in the 80s anymore. We're not Fellowship of Christian Athletes where lots of athletes on a sports team would come and do a Bible study, right? That's not it anymore. We are the uncool kids in the lunchroom who, when we stand for something, the lunch tray is going to get knocked out of our hand. And you know what? We just need to deal with it. It's what it is.
Yep. Yeah, that's really good. And it's funny because that principle you see true in society as well. Society saying, well, I'm just going to be accepted in this body. There are things we should be ashamed of. So they have, my only point is, they have the same longing for just like, I am who I am. And I don't really care about what people think about me. Yeah. But that confidence in that identity is misplaced because it should be in our identity as Christ. And anything short of that should be fairly embarrassing because it goes against what Christ's standard is for living life, period. So shaving your head and tattooing it all over the place and piercings and colored hair, this, that, and the other. We can love those people, but we cannot love those actions. Like I'm not going to say, yeah, I think that looks great. And they would probably be fine with that, but like fine as in they don't care about what other people think. My only point is that they long for the same thing. And it's a good longing. It's a good longing to go, yep, this is my principle and this is what I stand for.
Right.
And as Christians, we have confidence knowing that that's actually the right principle.
And I think that as people see Christians stand on true principles with conviction, that will actually be attractive. I mean, like there's the story of many stories of martyrs who refused to cave in the face of persecution. Now we have to remember there were a lot of people who were persecuted who did cave, right? Like we can't glorify it. But there was the one where they were lined up on the ice and they were going to be thrown into the frozen. Well, the lake wasn't frozen, but there was ice on top of the lake, and their courage was such that several of the soldiers marched out with him and stood next to them, or were also thrown into the frozen lake. And so the people who do have that longing and it's just misplaced, they'll see Christians standing with conviction, and that will be attractive to them. And then there will be a lot that it's not attractive to, but that's, that is what it is.
Yeah. All right, can we touch on building a little bit?
Yep.
So if we're going to wield Christian politics, one of the frustrations we've had is, what are we trying to build? We lived in America went through a phase where it was ambitious. It was striving to be more. It was striving to build interstates. It was striving to build skyscrapers. It was taking pride in the fact that we're doing this as a nation, for the good of the community. And now you look at interstates and you can point to them as a significant reason we've collapsed our society, but that's a conversation for a different time. But we strove for something. We were trying to build something, and now, as I've been thinking about this, we don't really build much anymore. We want to belong to a place. We talked about with Stephen the idea of the fifth commandment, honoring your father and mother, and part of honoring your father and mother is embracing their traditions, taking what they've laid down for you, and carrying on the mantle. Now, I had mentioned in that a brief snippet about the genealogies, and the genealogies point to, ages of years and years of families in the same faith, Judaism. I do want to clarify that's not all I mean. Obviously, the genealogies are there to point us to the lineage of Christ, going back to Adam and through David and beyond. That's not the only reason genealogies are there, but to me, that is one of the effects of putting a genealogy in is generation after generation coming to and having a knowledge of Christ, in our case. But we need to build something. So we look now, and our things, our parents' properties, they don't hold much value to us beyond the commodity that they are, right? So the dollar value that's been assigned to that property. So how do we get to building structure, like being ambitious and taking pride of the things that we not only have but want to accomplish? Do you have any insight or thoughts on how we can build both physical things but also just communities and take pride in the area and the place that we live, because it is the area and the place that God has given us to live?
I think that's actually exactly it. Like, we have too small of a view of God's sovereignty. Strangely, I was just talking with Ruben about the idea of metabolism. And he asked what metabolism means. And so I was explaining, I have a slow metabolism and mommy has a faster metabolism. So she burns food faster and I burn food a lot slower. And there are things you can do about that. But like, part of something that I struggle with is submitting to the body that God gave me, right? Like, just realizing I can't eat all the time. Like, she can snack all day. And in fact, she often needs to snack all day because she's just burning through it, right? I can't do that. It's not healthy for me. And like, I can complain about that all I want, but that's the body that God has given me. And so my problem is actually in submitting to God's sovereignty here. He gave me this body and I need to be responsible with it as it is. God gave you your family. God gave you the place where you live. Now, obviously, as you know, you can relocate. But as long as you're there, that's where God has you. God puts you as a member of the nation that you are a part of, the country that you're a part of. And so there's a certain degree where we are responsible before God for how we will conduct ourselves within the communities, the businesses, the families that he has put us in. And to simply say, I don't really like the family that I'm a part of, so I'm just going to check out, not acceptable, right? To simply say, I don't really like the country or the legacy of slavery that we have, I'm just going to call America terrible. Or to say, none of it matters, it's all going to hell, and there's nothing worthwhile in the world, so I'm not going to work for the good of my community or my city or my country. That's also wrong, right? God put us here, and we have an obligation before God to be responsible to the people around us, and to the city around us, and to the state around us. And that has a many different implications. But just submitting to the sovereignty of God, of where He placed you in your family and in your nationality, right? And then understanding that you have a responsibility to love and improve and build that small society of family or larger society of country, is something that I think that we need to just believe more strongly, right? This is not optional. God put us here, and He has expectations with where He put us. So that's one thought.
And it's not elaborate. I think we need to really hammer this point frequently. It is not. We are not asking for extraordinary efforts here.
Right.
We're asking you to know your neighbors and frequently connect with them. They're not going to like it. We live in a culture that hates going outside the walls of their house and interacting with people. And we have our earbuds in, and we look down, and we look away. So I guess in that sense, I am asking for the extraordinary. But it is simply know your neighbors, spend time with your neighbors, interact with your neighbors. If you've got kids in sports events, spend time with those families. Wherever you have interactions with people, even if it's the grocery store clerk, get to know your grocery store clerk. I don't know that I can say invite your grocery store clerk over for dinner at some point. That seems a little bit beyond the realm, but maybe not. I don't know. But we should have a sense of community that we currently don't have. But those aren't elaborate, extraordinary things. Those are just things in your daily life that you are seeing differently or using differently. But it is going to require sacrifice of some sort. It is going to require you to spend less time on Facebook or Netflix or whatever. And then my tag on to that would be do it as a family.
Yep.
As much as possible, do it as a family. This isn't the individual. Each and every one is trying to muster up on our own. It is trying to, as a family unit, participate in this society. Get as involved as you can in this society. And if that leads to, hey, as you have, as you're building relationships in your neighborhood, a need arises to repair the curbs on your street because all the curbs are busted up and the city's not going to take care of it. Take the initiative and build those curbs. I mean, be a part of making something better. Even if there's maybe somebody else who could do it, or you pay your taxes and you think that's the city's problem and they should take care of it, like just take the initiative, do it, get it done, build the curb, and then see where it goes from there. I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, apart from the kind of the theological principle of God's sovereignty and us being responsible for where He's put us, I also had two thoughts. One is very similar to what you said with building for your family, right? And incorporating and involving your family. But I just want to extend that a little bit and say, build for your family a generation or two down the road, right? Like, love your descendants, right? That could be through wise investing. It could be through creating a place, if you have the means to do so, that they can return to, right? A place where there are, in the future, shade trees that they can sit under on a summer day, rather than just a blank HOA backyard that has no shade at all for hanging out, right? Like have a target, and you and your wife and your family, I think, ought to have a specific target of how you're building something into your family that is not just for you. You might not even see it, and it's selfish to only pursue things that you might reap the fruit of. Maybe not even just for your kids, but that you could envision this might affect our grandkids. Like, intentionally target one thing at a time. And that could be a short-term project of a couple months, or you might say this is going to be a couple years, right? Where that's...
And in doing so, tell and reiterate and ingrain your kids over and over and over again that is why you're doing it.
Yep.
Because your kids need to know that too. And then your kids need to carry on that legacy.
Yep.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking, you and I and our sisters learned service by mom and dad serving.
Right.
Mom and dad were always the last to leave functions, and they wouldn't leave until everything was cleaned up.
Right.
And in that, we were tied into cleaning up. The faster it got cleaned up, the faster we could leave, even if it was something something we weren't enjoying doing. But we learned that service because mom and dad made a principle and a habit of their life of doing it. So whatever you make a principle of and you're doing, will get ingrained in your kids as you're doing it, especially if, and mom and dad did have the conversation with us, but especially if as you're doing it, you're consistently reminding your kids, this is our goal, this is our aim, this is our purpose. And it's just another way to incorporate God's word into administering truth to your children.
Yeah, so that was my first one. And then my second one is, especially as we remember that we are in a war, right? Not just a general spiritual battle that always confronts Christians, but we are in a war specifically for our culture. Like our culture is rejecting God. Our culture is rejecting the gospel. Our culture is rejecting the fundamental principles that underlie how God has built the universe, right? And as we remember that we're in a war, here's my challenge to myself and to you listening. Have a specific thing that you're doing that engages in that warfare. Have something specific and focused and involve your kids as it is age appropriate that is involved in that warfare. So here's one that I have been thinking about. I mentioned earlier that we went to that counter protest where the people had come and they were protesting Roe versus Wade. They're trying to apply political pressure so that Georgetown and the towns around us will become more likely to turn a blind eye to abortions going on in their community. Okay. When we went to that protest, they had brought people in from Austin. In fact, one of the protesters there on the other side of us was surprised that I was from Georgetown, which is where the protest was taking place, because they had brought people in from Austin for it. And I just got to thinking, I'm tired of them showing up in our town and having more people at this protest than we have, right? So I don't know where this will go, but I'm encouraged or challenged to try to network with other churches so that this will happen again. And the next time it happens, when they bring 30 people, I want us to have 300 people. I don't want it to even be close, right? They're coming to our town, bringing these ungodly ideas. I want 300 Christians along the streets around the city hall so that they don't even have anywhere that they can stand, right? When the people in cars drive by who are just going about their business, I want them to see way more signs that says, we love babies, we're pro-life, we're abolitionists. I don't want 35 yahoos from Austin coming up and destroying and getting the clause of promoting abortion into the town where I live. Now, that's a bit complicated because there are some people here who are abolitionists, and that's definitely how I view myself. And I'm going to be asking churches, and not all of them are in that same camp. And so it's going to be kind of a negotiation of what are we doing. And but like, there's no reason that we shouldn't have more people than people they're bringing in from Austin at one of these sorts of rallies, right? Like, this is our town, and I want to help insist on godly demonstrations of what God expects of a society. So I'm going to start calling churches and seeing if we can put together just a group that would be willing to come out maybe once or twice a year, right? As these things happen. And that's just one thing where I'm saying I want to engage. I want to take the fight to the culture. And here's the thing: as we were at that, we did hold up signs, and it was somewhat aggressive. But a lot of us also went and I had an almost 2-hour conversation with a lady, right, who was very soft to issues of the gospel, right? And so there's the public witness, and then there's the loving engagement, and both of those have to happen. And so this is not just warfare dropping napalm. But this is warfare in loving people and saying, you will not come this far, but I'm going to meet you on that line, and let's talk, and let's see if we can learn a little bit more about Jesus.
Yeah, that's really good. We don't need to give this disclaimer, but we should, right along those lines. We don't speak harshly against things like homosexuality or transgender community because we have anything wrong with the people themselves. We are fighting the idea that they believe. So we can passionately argue against that idea of homosexuality while still loving that person. And it sounds cliche and cheesy, but we do not intend to discriminate against them. We genuinely want them to see Christ. And so when we speak these truths, we are not speaking against any individual person. We are simply speaking against the idea that they are promoting, and on the idea, and enslaved to. And in the idea, we will passionately hate it and fight it. But we can hold those two things apart. We can distinguish those two things to where we can still love them as people. They're still people. The left always says, well, if you deny that there's transgenders, then you're a bigot and you hate transgender people. You
deny that they exist.
You deny that they exist. And that's a false dichotomy. It's not true. The person exists. What they're dealing with is likely not. The condition is not actually transgenderism. It's gender dysphoria. So that's a long disclaimer saying we don't hate the people. We just want them to see truth, God's truth, not our truth, God's truth.
Yeah. Good.
Well, I think this has probably gone on long enough.
Yep.
You have any final thoughts you want to wrap up with?
Just that more and more, we're in war. And to borrow an analogy from our pastor's sermon this morning, when you're at war, it's appropriate to fire live rounds from your gun. If you're at a picnic by the beach and it's vacation, it's not appropriate. But that's not the situation that we're in right now. And I guess to go all the way back to where we started, I think the greatest hindrance to the gospel going forward right now in our culture is that Christians think we're at a picnic. Mm-hmm. And we're not at a picnic. We're at war. And the Bible is the sword of the Spirit, right? We're doing battle against principalities and rulers and against false and worldly philosophies. And those false and worldly philosophies are not on the fringes. They're in everything. They're in taxation policy. They're in pushes to be socialist and communist. These are fundamental spiritual principles underneath all of it. They're in the transgender argument. These are not purely political distinctions. And the fact that we continue to only view them politically shows that we don't understand that they are worldview, religious, philosophical things that we need to push back on and that we need to conquer in the name of Christ.
Yep. Yep.
Good.
Good deal.
All right. Well, thanks so much for checking out this episode. We're hoping to be back on a regular schedule. So look forward. We have an upcoming couple of interviews dealing with the foundations of Christian political engagement, and also one coming up dealing with Christian business and how to be a Christian employee and how to be a Christian boss to some degree as well. So look for those over the coming weeks. And as always, you can find all of our content on our website, which is rebuildpodcast.com. All right, Bradley, have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well.